Hello, everybody. I'm going to invite our guests up on stage, so give me just a moment, please. All right, I've invited them both on stage, and once they accept, there is Greg. And just waiting for Dr. McTier. You just have to accept our invite. And I will try that again, just in case she didn't receive it. All right, Dr. McTier. Hopefully you're receiving our invite to join us on stage. Okay, well, we just came from another event. We had technical difficulties on Zoom, so something's in the air tonight. There she is. Wonderful. Okay, you are both on stage with us, and I am inviting you both to video. So let's see if we can get you up on video as well. Oh, there she is. Hi. And Greg, it says you're on video, but we can't see you. So hang on just a second. Okay, there's two of us. Greg, I don't know why you're not up there. Can you hear me, Greg?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, okay, great. Can you
It
invite
says
yourself on
video
camera?
on there.
I
I'm
know.
on camera. I'm showing on mine.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. All right, very good. All right, well, then we will go ahead and get started. So, hello, Firesiders, and welcome to Adventures by the Book, where our mission is to connect people and communities through the superpower of books. I'm your host, Susan McBeth, and I'm delighted to be hosting today not one, but two special guests. First of all, we have astrophysicist, folklorist, and newly published author, Dr. Moiya McTier. Welcome. And also the CEO of Melier, Greg McBeth. The two of them will be having a modded conversation about Dr. McTier's new book, The Milky Way, an autobiography of our universe. I am so excited for this conversation today. But before I introduce them officially, I'd like to welcome those of you who are in our virtual studio, and you can join yourself up on stage anytime to converse with us live or ask questions. And also those who are listening in on our public profile page, as well as those who are listening into our social media channels. Our approximate 45-minute chat today is intended to be a conversation. And one of the great perks of Fireside is that you can invite yourself up to ask questions. You can wait till the end, or if you have pressing questions for Dr. McTier or Greg, feel free to invite yourself up on stage at any time. Share your feedback, ask questions, make comments. And if you haven't already ordered a copy of Dr. McTier's book, The Milky Way, you can do so on our website, Adventures by the Book. And once we get our conversation started, I am going to type that link into the fortune cookie in the middle of your screen, so you can click right on that and go order your copy now. So let's get started. Our guest moderator today is Greg McBeth, founder and CEO of Melier, whose mission it is to help you create an out-of-this-world wine experience no matter where in the Milky Way you are. Okay, well, maybe some limitations apply. Check them out at melier.com to learn more and order a bottle of out-of-this-world wine to complement your Milky Way reading. Greg has been interested in astrophysics since he was a small child, and even dressed up as the planet Earth in first grade when everybody else was dressing up as dinosaurs. He already expressed his interest in the universe. Before founding Melier, he attended Stanford University and was a professional poker player, and he still enjoys astronomy, physics, and math. Welcome, Greg.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah. And Greg will be in discussion today with Dr. Moiya McTier, astrophysicist, folklorist, and science communicator, who became the first person at Harvard to study both astronomy and mythology. Fascinating. She earned her PhD in astrophysics at Columbia University, where she was selected as a National Science Foundation Research Fellow. She has consulted with Disney and PBS and has helped design exhibits for the New York Hall of Science. She also hosts, the XO Love podcast, which explores fictional world building through the lens of science. And she gives talks around the globe on science. She is here today to discuss her new book, as I mentioned, The Milky Way, Autobiography of a Universe. Wonderful. Welcome, Dr. Moiya McTier.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We are delighted to have both of you on Fireside today to learn more about our own Milky Way, told in a quite innovative way. So take it away, moderator Greg.
Sure. Well, it's great to meet you, Dr. McTier.
You too.
I'd love to start by just learning a little bit more about what got you into astronomy and astrophysics. It's a niche space, no pun intended. And I don't often meet people that have that interest in that background. And obviously, you chose a career in that. So I'd love to hear what got you to that point.
Yeah, sure. Your interest in space goes back much further than mine. I grew up in the woods, far enough from a city, so I did have a really nice view of the night sky, but I did not care about it at all. It wasn't until I got to college in my sophomore year when one of my friends begged me to go with her to an astronomy class that I found it for the first time. And the professor said we would get free pizza every week if we signed up for the class. And I was a broke college student, so I was like, all right, sure. And by the end of that semester, after learning about galaxies and the expansion of the universe, I was kind of hooked. But it wasn't just the science that I was interested in, it was also the communication of science, which is now what I get to do full time.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I had free pizza, I might have done that as a major as well. I wish we had that opportunity. That's
Carbs
really cool.
are such a great motivator.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it sounds like the storytelling aspect, the kind of narrative behind it was also what was appealing. Is that what drove the double major with mythology?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was always interested in mythology. I grew up as an only child and didn't have any friends who lived nearby to play with, so I spent most of my time in the woods developing my own imagination and reading a crap ton of fantasy books. So I was super into mythology, and I just didn't realize you could study it or do it professionally until I got to college. So it was almost like the opposite with each field. I knew astronomy was a thing that you could do, but I wasn't interested in it. And I was very interested in folklore, but didn't realize you could do that. And then because I'm bad at choosing, I just went for both of them. And yeah, the storytelling is now something that I get to do professionally.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there's a lot of intersection between the historical storytelling throughout different cultures and the relationship with humanity and the night sky. And there's a lot of that in the book. I really enjoyed kind of learning about some of the ways in which people had relationships with the night sky that I wasn't aware of. So I guess at what point in your career did you start thinking about writing a book?
I've always wanted to write a book, but I got the opportunity to write this book when a literary agent approached me back in 2019. One of his authors saw me give a talk on Juneteenth that was actually really interesting because it compared the length of slavery and Jim Crow, these 400 years, to timescales in space. So this is how far our galaxy moved during the 400 years of slavery and racism. And the literary agent was interested in my work, so we started working on a proposal together. And I was very happy that when I came up with this weird perspective of writing the book from the point of view of the Milky Way, that he didn't laugh in my face. And we did manage to find some editors who didn't think it was too childish and gave me a chance.
Yeah. So what made you choose that perspective? I mean, I've read a lot of, probably too many to count, books on astronomy, physics, et cetera. And this was the first one that I've ever read that's from that first person account. What drove that decision, and how did you find the process of actually writing it?
There were a couple reasons. One, I had just read The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie, which is a fiction book told from the perspective of a god looking over this fantasy world, except that god is represented by a rock. So I was already in the mindset of thinking from weird perspectives. And like you said, there are a bunch of science books already out there that other people have written. And I wanted this book to be something different. I didn't just want to add another human astronomer perspective to the big pile. And to write it, I was trying to be mostly grounded in the science. I started thinking about the experiences that the galaxy has had. You know, it's more than 13 billion years old. At the beginning of its life, it was much closer to other galaxies physically. I describe it in the book as a giant party with all the early galaxies having a grand old time. And then the universe expanded. Most of the galaxy's friends were torn away from it, flung to the outer reaches of the universe, and now they can only communicate with light if they're lucky. The Milky Way also spends most of its time forming new stars, getting really attached to them, and then watching those stars die. So I started thinking about what a human would be like if it spent most of its time in isolation, and if it spent much of its time destroying something that it loved. Like that would mess with your psychology, man. So that's where the personality came from.
Yeah, well, one thing I really liked is kind of how you traced it through a lifeline, and told it from that perspective, right? It kind of provided interesting, color to what that process must have been like, and also just a sort of sense. I think you used the one thing you did really well was use a lot of markers to help, simple humans assess the timescales that are involved here, because they're so alien to our normal day-to-day perception.
Yeah,
I would love if you can just start even by just kind of, for folks that maybe haven't read it, or maybe there's a little bit too in depth, like just to kind of give a summary of what has been the history and how have we gotten to this point in a kind of a as simple way as possible, right?
Yeah, let me give the universe in 30 seconds. So it started about 14 billion years ago with the Big Bang. The first atoms that formed were mostly helium atoms, mostly hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium. And then they formed the first stars, the first clouds of gas that collected under gravity to form the first galaxies. And that was when our Milky Way formed 13-ish billion years ago. And since then, it's been growing by gathering other galaxies and merging with them by forming new stars from its gas. And this book doesn't just look backwards in time, it also looks forward in time to the eventual end of the universe, because that is what the galaxy considers its eventual death. And along the way, the book also talks about the evolution of human understanding of space, with myths all the way through the way that we use telescopes right now to study the sky.
I think one of the interesting things is just, you talk about these timescales and 14 billion years. I think it was 13.8 to be specific, right? Plus or minus 40, something
40
like that.
million, yeah.
Yeah, 40 million, right? I mean, that's it's wild to be able to even think back that there's any sort of specificity you can put to that. Just at a high level, what's the broad strokes evidence for how we got to this point, and the history that we can see back to?
Yeah, there are a few pieces of evidence, and we saw these pieces of evidence over time. We had a gradual understanding of cosmology, of the origin of our universe. One big piece of evidence we have is the cosmic microwave background, or the CMB. This is a signal that you can see anywhere you look in space, because it's the heat signature left over from the Big Bang. And when we look at the CMB, we can actually look at how matter was distributed, because where there was denser material, there was also more energy and more heat. So we are looking at the heat signature, which tells us how matter was distributed back in the beginning of the universe. And that matches our simulations of what should have happened early in the universe based on what the universe looks like now. And also, we have this advantage in astronomy, because the farther away an object is, the longer it takes light from that object to reach us. So if we're looking at really distant objects, we're also looking far back in time. So in some ways, we can see parts of the early universe. If you saw any of the images coming out from JWST over the last couple months, we have that new deep field image that's showing us galaxies from the first billion years of the universe. Those are a couple ways that we know what happened back then.
Yeah, and I'd love to get to the JWST. I mean, the imagery has been just unbelievable to take a look at, and I mean, I feel like it's that almost that same leap that we had originally with Hubble from ground-based telescopes. So, love to get your perspective on that. One of the things you started to talk through a little bit more in the book is as the universe expanded and cooled, and atoms were able to form, and galaxies started to clump through different densities of gas, and gravity obviously pulled them together. You focus a lot on our local group, which is our local collection of galaxies. What sort of made you decide to focus on that? And I'm specifically kind of interested in how the sort of the naming etymology, and how you sort of thought through like creating names for the different galaxies in the local group. Like what was your sort of vision there? How did you want to describe our local galactic cluster?
Yeah. So when you read a human's autobiography, they're going to talk about where they grew up because that will influence who they are. And so I needed to talk about galactic society. This was a really fun act of world building in a sense for me. I got to imagine what a society of galaxies would be like. And I imagined that it would have kind of a fractal structure like our human society does, where we have local governments and then regional governments and then federal, and then there's world stuff. So most of the time, the Milky Way would be interacting with the very local society, which is the cluster of galaxies that we call the local group. There are about 50 galaxies in it, but most of them are much smaller than the Milky Way. Most of them are small satellite galaxies that orbit in either the Milky Way or Andromeda's halos. So I imagined that they would be maybe annoying neighbors, maybe pests. Maybe the Milky Way would have positive relationships with some of them, but also the Milky Way has a major chip on its shoulder and like a major superiority complex that's masking some deep insecurities. It was fun to think about the psych profile of this galaxy. But for the names, so in the book, the Milky Way talks about Larry and Sammy, or the large and small Magellanic Clouds. The Milky Way really doesn't like one of them, and you'll have to read the book to find out which one it is. And then the Milky Way also talks about Trin, or the Triangulum Galaxy. And I knew that the Milky Way probably wouldn't call them by these Earth names, but it would know that humans use names, and so it has to call them something. And I just wanted to give them fun monikers that people can remember and use when they try to think of the story of how space works.
Yeah, well, let's go into more detail about that. So can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned a few of our nearest neighbors. Can you talk a little bit about each of them and what makes them interesting?
Well, from the Milky Way's perspective, they're not interesting, but I'm not the Milky Way, so I can say they are. So the large and small Magellanic Clouds are small dwarf satellite galaxies that orbit around the Milky Way. They are the two nearest galaxies to us. They are interesting for a couple of reasons. We can see both of them with our naked eyes. If you go to the southern hemisphere, they look like fuzzy blotches in the sky. And they are named after Ferdinand Magellan, who was supposed to have done the first circumnavigation of the globe, even though he didn't make it. He died before he made the full trip. But we still named them after him anyway, and the Milky Way digs at us for that. But these dwarf galaxies are interesting because studying them helps us learn more about how galaxies evolve from different starting points. So we now can understand more about how dwarf galaxies work by studying these clouds.
Interesting. So what dwarf galaxies relative to us, right? So I assume they're smaller,
Yeah.
fewer stars. What's kind of specifically unique about them versus our our galaxy? Can you start to describe kind of what our, like, high level, what our galaxy structure is like?
Yeah, sure. The main difference is just that they're smaller. You're right. They have fewer stars. They're less massive. We don't have an exact cutoff in terms of mass, size, luminosity, or temperature, or anything really between a dwarf galaxy and not a dwarf galaxy. It's kind of just a loose term in astronomy. These small galaxies can have spiral structures, but not all of them do. The main anatomy of our Milky Way galaxy is interesting because it is a beautiful barred spiral, we call it. The body parts of the Milky Way, and there is a chapter in here called My Body, where the Milky Way talks about its physical structure. In the center, you have the bulge. This is a spherical, kind of chaotic, densely populated region of space that houses our galactic bar. That's a dense, co-moving group of stars. So it's almost like a solid bar made out of stars that move together over time. Outside of the bulge has about 30% of the stars in the Milky Way. Outside of the bulge is a disk. It's pretty flat compared to the bulge. It's two-dimensional, and that's where stars are moving in pretty neat circular orbits. That's where we have the spiral arms, those gorgeous twists that you probably think of when you picture the Milky Way galaxy. And then outside of that, in a big bulbous cloud, is the galactic halo. There's the circumstellar halo, which is just a bunch of gas and dust, really. And then there's the dark matter halo, which extends out really far and is mostly made of dark matter and a lot of what we call globular clusters. These are just clusters of stars, most of which are left over from previous galactic encounters. Those globular clusters and other dwarf satellites like the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds, they orbit in the halo.
And the halo extends out, even starts to touch halos from other galaxies, correct?
Yeah. I mean, almost all galaxies have their own dark matter halo. A massive galaxy has a much more massive and more extended dark matter halo. So the Milky Way and Andromeda definitely have the biggest dark matter halos in our galaxy. And our most extended halos are just starting to overlap a little bit between the Milky Way and Andromeda. So it's almost like they're just starting to touch fingies. It's very cute.
Yeah, like a first date.
Even before that, this is the tentative. You're out in public and you scoot your hand over to touch their pinky to see if they move it away. They're still early in the stages.
That's perfect. It feels just like high school all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to get a little bit more into Andromeda and kind of Andromeda's place in our galaxy as well. I think you did a really good job of kind of highlighting what that rivalry might almost look like. And I think there's some interesting stuff about To the Future State. But I'd like to dive a little bit more into the Milky Way itself. I mean, you talked about the Milky Way from a scientific perspective just now. How would you sort of more, I guess, colloquially describe our galaxy within the context of the broader universe and our local group?
Sure. The Milky Way is the biggest, most massive galaxy in the local group. Galaxies in general are collections of stars, gas, dust, and dark matter that are all gravitationally bound. Gravity is in charge of pretty much everything out in space. It determines how stuff moves and really has a lot of influence over the large-scale structure of the universe. So if you zoom out from our local group, you start to see clusters of galaxies that gather in superclusters. We ourselves are part of the Virgo supercluster of galaxies, so named for the Virgo cluster of galaxies that's kind of the biggest central cluster in this supercluster. And when you zoom out really far and you start looking at the large scale structure of the universe, we call it the cosmic web, because these galaxy superclusters have condensed into these long filaments, these long streams of matter with huge voids in between. And we aren't totally sure why that happens or what's going to continue to happen as the universe expands and as matter gets distributed, and maybe dark energy gets stronger as space gets more spread apart. So we're in a very interesting time for large-scale universe astronomy, because it's kind of an inflection point. We want to know what's going to happen next, and we're at the right time to see how dark energy is behaving for that to happen.
I'm sorry to interrupt you in the middle of this because this is so fascinating, but I just heard from tech support that why Greg is not on screen with you. And so they asked me to remove him from the stage and invite him back up. So can we take just a moment to do that? And I'm sorry for the interruption. All right, I just removed Greg from stage and I'm going to invite him back up, and hopefully he'll go right to video alongside you, Dr. McTier. And if it doesn't work, we'll just continue anyway. There he is. Okay, much better. Now we can see you both. Thank you. Go ahead and continue with my apologies.
No problem. So I'd love to, as we start to think about and talk a little bit more about the future state, get into dark matter, dark energy, and how that informs the future of our galaxy and the universe as well. Before we do that, I'd like to start zeroing in a little bit on kind of the Earth and humans and that perception. Something I thought was very interesting in your book was how you described the relationship between the galaxy and humanity. But if you can just put it in a broader context, whether you just even want to use the solar system as a starting point, like how does our Earth, our sun, our solar system fit within the broader context of the Milky Way?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of numbers, our solar system is centered on our sun, which is just one star of a few 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. And the Milky Way is one of the Milky Way is one of several 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, and who knows what's beyond that region. Within the Milky Way physically, our solar system is about halfway between the center of the galaxy and the fuzzy edge of the galaxy. In astronomer units of thousands of parsecs, we are 8,000 parsecs away from the center of the galaxy. And I don't know what that is in miles, because that's not the units I learned in school.
Yeah, it was parsecs, what, 3-point-something light years?
Light years.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the things that I like, I forget which graphic it is, but sometimes you'll see the graphics. I'll see them on Instagram occasionally, and they'll show you, when you look at all the stars in the universe, the galaxy would be like this, and then all the stars that are observable, even on the darkest night sky, encompass this tiny fraction, like a pinhead on the chart almost.
That's a good point, because all of the stars that we can see are the brightest types of stars. They're the size of our sun and above. But most of the stars in the galaxy are much less massive than our sun. We call them M-dwarfs, and they account for about 70% of the stars in the galaxy, probably in the universe, but we're not sure if that's constant. But they aren't bright enough for us to see. So yeah, we have a really weird sample bias when we look out in the night sky.
Well, if you look at the stars that are closest to us, you talked about the relationship of the Milky Way with respect to the local group. What is our relationship of our star relative to what else is out there? What does that nearest neighbor, quote unquote, universe look like?
Our nearest star is about 4 light years away. But we live in a pretty boring part of the galaxy. We're in that disk where things are moving on nice circular orbits and stars are much less densely packed. I actually did a research project in grad school to see how common stellar encounters are in different parts of the galaxy. So how often do stars have close flybys with each other? And out here in our part of the galaxy, it's very rare. We might expect an encounter within, a few thousand AU once in the next 15 million years. So those are really uncommon, whereas in the bulge, that central region of the galaxy that I was talking about earlier, 80% of stars have an encounter, at least one encounter every billion years.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that it was that frequent outside of this. Is that something that potentially could also contribute to the habitability of this area?
Yeah, absolutely. My research topic, my dissertation was on the galactic habitable zone. Where in the galaxy do we find the conditions that would be good for life like us? And you want to be close enough to a lot of stars that there are heavy metals, these elements that get created in the cores of heavy stars, but you also need to be far enough away from heavy stars because you don't want to be near any supernovae explosions and you don't want to be near harmful stellar radiation. So there's this delicate balance that you have to meet, and our region of the galaxy is perfect for that, which is a very coincidental answer. Anytime there's something that coincidental, you should go back and look at your search criteria because we really are limiting ourselves to stuff that looks like us.
Yeah, well, I think the history of how we kind of got to this point is very interesting. But even over the course of history, we've rotated around the galaxy, right? So there's where our specific location has shifted over time, but I guess we're still orbiting in a rough kind of distance from the center,
Yeah.
where there's probably a lot more activity.
Yeah, the galaxy is radially symmetrical. So being on one side of the galaxy versus the other doesn't matter. It's being closer to the center versus further away from the center that makes the real difference.
Got it.
But even in the course of all of human history, we haven't moved that far. It takes 250 million years for the sun to make one orbit of the galaxy.
Okay, so
When we were on the other side, there
Triassic.
were dinosaurs. Yeah, it wasn't humans.
That's pretty awesome. So one thing you talked about early on is how you wanted to present the perspective of the galaxy, having grown up effectively alone for billions of years. How would you describe the personality of the Milky Way from this book, and how did you choose that personality style?
I've been using the word sassy. I think snarky also works. One review that I loved said that the Milky Way is such a jerk, and I want out in the best way possible. I don't know if I can swear on this, but one review said that it's like your cattiest best friend. So it has, like I said before, a chip on its shoulder. It presents as very confident and very sure of itself, but it is holding on to a lot of insecurity and self-loathing inside because it feels bad that it keeps eating other galaxies and ripping them apart and destroying its own stars just so that it can continue to live. So it feels very guilty. One thing that I did in this book was not secretly, pretty transparently work through some of my own mental health issues that I was going through over the last couple of years. Black holes in this book are the physical manifestation of a galaxy's mental health struggles. It's your depression, your anxiety, your intrusive thoughts telling you that no one loves you. And over the course of the book, the Milky Way introduces you to that and also tells you how it overcomes those whispers from its central black hole. And I did that again, inspired by the science. We see evidence in other galaxies of black holes making it so that galaxies can't form new stars. We call it quenching, but when a galaxy can't form new stars, we call it dead. And so black holes can kill galaxies, and I wanted the Milky Way to overcome that.
One thing you also had a very clear personality alignment around was, you had a very specific point of view on the relationship between the Milky Way and humans. And tell me more about that.
We are so tiny compared to the Milky Way. I wanted people to know that after reading this book, but I didn't want people to then immediately get scared of or intimidated by the universe, because that's usually the next step. What I wanted instead was for people to feel a connection to space by telling them over and over again in this book that we are made up of space and that we're a part of it and that our Earth is moving through space all the time. But we are still beings that live for maybe 100 years if we're lucky, and the Milky Way is more than 10 billion years old and still kicking. And so we're like ants. We're smaller than ants to the Milky Way. And yet it has been very amazed by how far we've come in our understanding of space. It fell in love with the stories that we told about it in our human history, the way that we relied on it to keep time and navigate and center our cultural identities around. And 300 or so years ago, when we had clocks and we started coming up with technology to make ourselves more self-sufficient, we stopped using the galaxy, and it's kind of upset. It wants us to pay attention to it again. So yeah, it likes that we're around, but it's not going to admit that it likes that we're around.
Yeah, it was amazing just when you hear the history and read about the history that you described across a variety of different cultures, just how closely attuned our kind of history is to the cycles in our solar system and the galaxy. And one thing that was, I thought you struck a really good balance around was this kind of concept of how closely we are tied. And I think you referenced the famous Carl Sagan quote around we are all made of star stuff, right, in the most literal sense. But then you also, kind of talked about the fact that in the broader context, there's sort of a pointlessness to it. And I personally have found that that's a very hard thing to juxtapose in your mind, because on one hand, it's awe-inspiring, on the other hand, it'd be kind of depressing. I'm kind of just curious, what your perspective is on this, and what you tried to reference and communicate in the book.
Yeah, I do see how people can have an existential crisis when they start thinking about the time and size scales of space. I stop myself from doing that in a couple of ways. I think that you can realize how small we are and how far away everything else is, and use that to motivate like a love for humanity, to recognize that no one else, nothing else is going to come to save us or help us or doom us or whatever. We're pretty alone. We're all we have. Therefore, we should see humanity and all earthlings as precious. And we should really make sure we take care of what we have, because everything else is out of our reach.
Yeah, well, so what is that? Obviously now there's a renewed interest, commercially at least, in terms of space flight and starting to look at other planets and that travel process. And obviously there's a very wide difference between going to a place like the moon or Mars versus going to even our nearest star. How do you think about the future of space travel from a human perspective? Obviously the distances are massive, but just what's you think, 1,000, a million years out, what does that potentially look like?
I don't know, man. I'm worried about now. I'm worried about the next 10 years here. I do think that if we can get over the many crises that our planet is dealing with now, that maybe it would bring us together, or maybe it would help us advance technologically. That tends to be what happens in human history. We face a hardship, and our human ingenuity, one of the things that the Milky Way loves about us most, gets us out of it and kind of projects us onward. We get a lot of momentum when we overcome struggles together. We are good as a social species at solving problems with each other. So if we manage to do that, then yeah, if interstellar speed is like interstellar travel and warp speed and wormhole technology, if we can do faster than light travel, I believe that we will eventually find it, as long as we don't destroy ourselves first.
Yeah, agreed. I think there's at least hope in the fact that we can create some amazing technologies that solve some of these pressing problems. It's just a question of, I guess, of when and do they arrive in time.
Well, yeah, and implementation. Are we actually willing to do what it takes to solve these problems with the solutions we have available? We're just not doing all that we can.
Yeah, 100%. Well, one piece of technology that has been really interesting, it's maybe not solving existential problems, but it's certainly solving astronomical observational ones, is the James Webb Space Telescope. And you referenced that earlier on. You referenced that in the book. Can you just tell people a little bit about what that is? And I'd love to kind of learn just your perspective on what's been most interesting so far, and what are you expecting to see in the future from it?
Yeah, sure. The JWST, or the Just Wonderful Space Telescope, as some people are calling it, was launched actually last Christmas. It's a space telescope that the astronomy community has been waiting for literally decades. It was originally supposed to launch in 2007 and just got pushed back over and over again until it launched last Christmas. And the goal with JWST was to study multiple scales of space. It was going to help us study planetary atmospheres, the expansion of the universe, and look back into the early universe at some of the first formed galaxies. We just got the first images from it in the last couple of months, and it has already sparked debate, very welcome, very healthy debate about things that we thought we knew about the beginning of the universe and the formation of the early galaxies. So yeah, it's rocking our world. I was so annoyed when the book came out, or when I submitted the final draft of the book, because just a month later we got the first JWST images, and we got news that we had taken a picture of the supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. It seemed like all of the really exciting announcements from the last year happened right after I submitted the final copy.
Well, yeah. What was I mean, timing's tough, right? Never know, especially with a NASA-led project, when that's going to actually happen.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about? I mean, what are you, of the stuff that you know that it's looking to learn more about or solve? What gets you most interested?
The planet atmospheres. When I was in grad school going around giving talks about my research, which was about the habitability of planets in different parts of the Milky Way, I ended so many of my talks with, we can't know anything about the surfaces or the atmospheres of these planets now because we don't have the technology, but wait for JWST. And now JWST is here, and it's already shown us some immaculate data about the atmospheres of some planets. We detected water vapor in the atmosphere of a Jupiter-like planet. We detected carbon dioxide in an atmosphere for, I think, the first time. Yeah, we are about to know so much more about exoplanets than we did last year. It's really exciting.
Do you think it's possible that we'd be able to see some signatures of potential life?
Maybe some of the biosignatures and some of the technosignatures that astronomers are looking for could be seen in the atmosphere, in the spectra that JWST collects. Biosignatures and technosignatures are evidence of life. These are usually chemicals or evidences of technology that would only happen with life processes, biological processes that we understand here on Earth.
Got it. Well, I know we have a few minutes left, so I'd love to kind of close out with talking a little bit more about what the future holds. So what is the future of our galaxy?
That depends entirely on the behavior of dark energy. The most likely scenario, astronomers think the most likely scenario, is that the universe will continue to expand. Galaxy clusters will get further and further apart, but within galaxy clusters, gravity will dominate and all of the galaxies will combine. So eventually, the Milky Way and Andromeda will collide and become Milkomeda. That's the couple name we've given them. They'll consume all of the little satellite galaxies in our local group, and then the universe will just continue until all of the gas is used up by galaxies to make stars. The last stars left will be those low mass M dwarfs that I was talking about earlier. They don't have exciting supernovae explosions when they die. They just slowly wither away and radiate all of their heat into the surrounding space. So it'll take trillions of years for them to lose all of their heat and energy. And then the last thing left will be black holes. And there is a hypothetical way for black holes to lose energy called Hawking radiation, where they can, over time, get rid of their energy. And only when there is no energy left in the universe will we say that it's dead. But that will happen trillions of years from now.
Yeah, so we'll obviously be long gone. But so outside of that, so it sounds like it's kind of a slow demise. so to
Yeah.
speak. How much of the galaxy over that time period will still be habitable? Like, at what point does it cease to be habitable for anybody?
That's a good point. I mean, it's the smaller scales that matter more for habitability, like what star you're orbiting,
Mhm.
and what that star is doing. So as long as there are individual stars that are okay, then we can still have habitable worlds. So there will be M dwarfs for trillions of years, and we expect planets to be habitable around some M dwarfs.
Okay, awesome. What's our night sky going to look like when Milkomeda becomes a thing?
That's a great question. The best guess right now is that it will look very bright. So as the galaxies are approaching, you can already see Andromeda in the night sky, but as the galaxies are approaching, it will get bigger and bigger in our night sky. When they collide, we actually won't be around anymore. Our sun will have already puffed up into its red giant phase by the time the galaxies collide. But let's say humanity escapes our solar system on a spaceship and we're still around to see the collision. All of the gas that comes into contact when the galaxies merge, that will set off a cascade of star formation. So there will be bursts of new starlight, and the whole night sky will light up.
Oh wow. I'd
Yeah.
love to see that. Well, if so, I know nowadays the night sky pollution has made it a lot less interesting to go out and look above. But if people are interested in seeing an amazing place to go see as much of the Milky Way as they can, what are some places you might recommend that they should go?
Ooh, I mean, my favorite places that I've been to see the night sky are on top of Mauna Kea in Hawaii, but I don't recommend everyone goes out there, especially now that Native Hawaiians are asking people not to like come and explore the island. I have also been to Chile. There are beautiful observatories in Chile, all up and down the country because it's very long and skinny. And one of the big industries in Chile is astrotourism. You can go and visit these different telescopes. There are really cool like resorts that specialize in guiding people through sky gazing. So yeah, Chile is a great place. But honestly, anywhere there's a dark sky. If you want to know where your nearest dark sky spot is, you can look up the Dark Sky Association. It's a nonprofit that monitors this type of thing. So you can find somewhere near you to observe the stars.
Okay, and last question for you before we open it up. So one thing that you really highlighted in the book was just how much our understanding of our galaxy and the universe at large has changed just even in the last 50, 100 years.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward another 100 or 1,000, pick whatever time scale you want. What of the things that you described are most likely to, what would you say if you had to guess? What's the most likely thing that we might be wrong about today? And what do you think, what would you feel most confident predicting that this will still be our understanding 1,000 years from now?
Ooh, I mean, I think the basics of stuff, like gravity, at least on these scales, I think we understand how that works pretty well. It's just the small and large scales that we're confused about. I think actually that we're probably pretty good on most things. But I do think that in the next 100 years, I'm pretty confident we'll figure out what dark matter is. I think that is well within our reach. I think dark energy will be a little bit difficult to solve, but still doable. I would not place a bet on answering the alien question, though. I think that could be solved next week. That could be solved in like 10,000 years. I don't know. But I think we'll figure out what dark matter is, because that's just a matter of developing the right tools and doing the right experiments here on Earth. That falls more into the particle physics realm, and you actually can run experiments there. We can't experiment on aliens when we don't know if there are aliens, so it's hard to put a time stamp on that question.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed that the Pentagon gives us something that's useful at some point in time. But I'm not holding my breath.
Me neither. But I will
Awesome.
tell you, astronomers are so bad at keeping secrets. Um, I do not have any confidence in an astronomer's ability to keep an alien secret if they knew that they were out there.
Yeah,
Zero confidence.
that would make sense to me as well. Okay, cool. Mom, do you want to open it up? What do you want to do?
Absolutely. Yeah, fascinating discussion. And I would like to open it up for questions. So, for those of you who are new to Fireside, to invite yourself up on stage, you just click the little round circle with the two white lines in the lower left hand corner of your screen, the menu, and you can invite yourself to speak. And we'd love to have your questions. In the meantime, while we're waiting to see if anyone's brave enough to do that, I want to thank Dr. McTier for telling the story of the Milky Way from a folkloric perspective for those of us who are non-scientific brains, like the two of you clearly are. It's been a fascinating discussion. Dr. McTier, where can we find you? I know you have your Exolore podcast. I'd love to see you bring your podcast to Fireside as a regular program. I think you have so much to chat about. We'll have to chat about that. But where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you for that. You can find the Exolore podcast wherever podcasts are available. It's all about fictional world building rooted in science and fact. So in every episode, I either build a new fictional world or break down a fictional world that already exists. You can also look for more of my folklore content. I co-host a YouTube show for PBS called Fate and Fabled, all about mythology from around the world. And you can find me on any of the social media platforms. By any, I mean Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm not cool enough to know other ones. On Go Astromo across all of them.
Well, you must be pretty cool if you're on TikTok.
I keep learning about new ones. I heard about Dub Smash the other day, and I was like, these kids move too fast for me.
Oh boy. And I love that you're not the stereotypical face of astrophysics. So kudos to you. I love that. And also, for those of you who want to follow Dr. Moiya McTier on Fireside, to encourage her to come back, just click on her icon and follow her, and you'll get notice of any time she is on Fireside. You can also do the same with Greg, CEO of Melier. Greg, can you say a few words about Melier? And also, maybe because Dr. McTier described our universe as sassy and snarky, maybe you can think of a good wine recommendation that would be a good pairing, sassy and snarky wine to drink while they're enjoying reading the Milky Way.
That's a good question. I don't know if I would have a clear off the top of my head description of a wine that fits that personality. But what I would say is that a good glass of wine goes well with any good book, and especially a book that makes you think. It's always nice to enjoy something that kind of comes along with having to actually sit there and really consider what you're reading, as opposed to just kind of going through the motions. So certainly you can go to Melier if you're interested in learning more about particular wine. But yeah, Dr. McTier, is great to read your book. Really appreciate you taking the time here today.
Well, thanks for your questions. I think this is the most sciencey chat that I've had about the book so far. So thank you for that.
Well,
It's nice to be able to show off my science chops every once in a while.
Well, I have to confess, when your publicist reached out to me, I said, let me tell you, I am not qualified to moderate this discussion. And the first person I thought of was Greg. So you guys did a phenomenal job. And I really enjoyed it. And I hope our audience did too. And this will convert to a recording afterwards, and we will share it on our social media channels and share it with you, Dr. McTier and Greg. So you're welcome to share as well. So again, you can get your copy of The Milky Way, an autobiography of our galaxy at adventuresbythebook.com, as typed in your fortune cookie in the middle of the screen. So thank you both again, and ask yourself this question. Until next time, what is your next adventure by the book? Thank you, everybody.